Welcome to the Next Level Podcast, powered by San Manuel, a series connecting you with the best minds in casino, hospitality, tribal government, and beyond. Enjoy the show.
Jonathan Murtaugh, how you doing, my friend?
Hello, sir. Good to be here. How are you? I'm doing well.
I'm doing well. Honestly, just thank you for doing this. I think when we think about this platform, I think you're the perfect guest, the Senior Vice President of Client Services at VaynerMedia. You guys are one of the fastest growing agencies in the world, and you have quite the career story that we've never really unpacked.
Yeah, it's a lot under the hood.
The time at Facebook, obviously your time with VaynerMedia, and just all the different stops along the way. So really interested today to just pick your brain on all things your career, kind of your craft and where you see the industry going. But to start, we always like to start with the origin story. And for you, that's going to be tough to have 3 minutes. But if you had to, kind of the high level, where you grew up, what your early interests are, key stops along the way and what you do now, what's your version of the origin story?
Oh, my version. Well, I'm looking at the Yamava logo behind you because it's going to make me sound like a plant, but I actually really did grow up next to the reservation, the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. I happened to grow up in San Bernardino. You and I met very coincidentally through, other business 30 years later. But I grew up in San Bernardino, California. I was raised by my grandparents. My grandfather was a kind of a blue collar Air Force guy. I went to what I like to call the Ivy League of San Bernardino, Cal State San Bernardino, Coyotes. What am I covering here? You want career origin story?
Yeah. Like, what do we need to know from kind of where you started to what you do today and kind of fill in the in between?
In 3 minutes. Wow.
Yeah, okay. It's tough.
All right. I'm going to blaze through and you double click. How's that?
Yep. That sounds great.
Okay. Here's the blaze through version. I was one of those people that went to college and just wanted to study what I liked. And so I had a degree in history with a focus on ancient Rome. So that meme that came out like a year ago, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? Like literally probably every third day I think about the Roman Empire. I have a degree in history with a focus on ancient Rome and a minor concentration in ancient China. And then I used all that preparation to leave college and have my first job be in social service, completely unrelated. So my first job out of college was literally working on Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles with at-risk youth. And then I did that as well in the Linwood Compton area. Did that for 4 years. It was amazing, incredible time. And then I had very young, I was married and had 2 children. And I got hit by the pinch of living in LA and needing to make a little more money. And also, I think I suffered from what a lot of people in that career do, which is burnout. The things that you see, I can't remember the stat, but it's like an NFL running back. Like the average career is like 2 to 3 years or something like that, just because it's so intense.
Yep.
And then I got my first big break, leading to what I do today, working for a global ad agency, and that was selling T-shirts. And literally, I had a degree in ancient Roman history, 4 years working on Skid Row, and had to turn that into a job. And obviously there's no job for that combination. And I had been ordering T-shirts for these like internship projects from a company. I got to know the owner. She's like, well, if you need a job, you can work here as a salesperson. You have a good personality. So I was like, I just needed to feed my family. So I went to work for this company in Pasadena. And the only thing that was a little different about them was they were not just, they were selling T-shirts. I was selling T-shirts to like burrito shops. Also, we were working with some theatrical movie releases, video games, a lot of the early like Blizzard, StarCraft games we did the t-shirts for. So I kind of learned, I literally knew nothing and was going on appointments with brand managers in at Blizzard Entertainment. Actually, see, it's so hard for me to do this in 3 minutes. Remind me to tell you.
Keep going.
Remind me to tell you the story about Monster, the soda.
Okay.
Because that was a moment. That was a pivotal moment for me. Anyways, I got good at sales, but especially in the realm of marketing or marketing services. And I hopped around jobs. I started working many years later. Well, I was also on the marketing side. I was in sports marketing for a time as a director of marketing. But then I worked for this a VC-funded startup in Boston. I was living in California, working remote. I would go to Boston every 6 weeks. And my company had an apartment that I stayed in South Boston. And it was a word-of-mouth media agency. And the whole premise of the company was, it was like a morph hybrid between agency work and a technology platform, but it was just about the power of a recommendation. So, if you recommend a restaurant to a friend, it's going to be a lot more powerful than just having heard about it on an ad, for instance, right?
100%. Yep.
After working there for 3.5 years, we had 65 people. I got an email that said, Sandy from Facebook. For context, this was in the summer of 2010.
Okay.
So Facebook was growing and kind of cool. I don't even know if I was on it yet. I may have just joined the platform. I thought it was spam. I almost deleted it. But against my better judgment, I opened it. And it was actually a headhunter from Facebook. And they reached out to me to go work for them. So in November 2010, I went to work for Facebook. At the time, it was just called Facebook. It wasn't Meta. We had not yet purchased Instagram or WhatsApp. This is pre-IPO. We IPO'd in February 2012. So I went to work at Facebook. I was there for 6 years. It was an incredible, incredible experience that I will never forget. And I made some of the smartest people, kindest people I will ever work with. And then I went into, like a lot of former people in tech at the time, I dabbled in VC and startups for a while. And then I was ready to kind of return to a normal workforce job. And one hole in my resume, I felt was, even though we worked in creative, I mean, obviously Facebook and Instagram and those are more media focused, was creative. I felt like I had a hole in creative, and but I never thought of going to an agency ever. Last thing on my list. I had a friend of mine that was running the LA office for VaynerMedia for Gary Vaynerchuk at the time. And I saw her at an event. She's like, hey, there's this role. And in my brain, I'm like, no, why would I do that? I would no interest in going to an ad agency. But she was like, no, but Gary is different. And I knew of Gary. I was at the time neutral. I wasn't a fanboy and I wasn't a hater. He's polarizing for some. Yeah. Now I know him. He's fantastic. But at the time I was just neutral. But I knew that he was an advocate. When I worked at Facebook, he was always very clear-eyed about the future of marketing. And he at risk to himself, he just told the truth. And he always told marketers, if you're not moving money into social, you're going to be behind. And he said it. He was one of the earliest people that saw it. Anyway, that was 4.5 years ago. I talked to Gary, of course, and I came on board. And it was 4.5 years ago. And it's been a rocket ship since then.
There's a lot to dive in there, and kudos to you. It's very hard to do 3 minutes, but I feel like that was still concise for your journey. And if I had to ask you, from social work to t-shirt salesman to now, like I said, senior vice president.
It sounds crazy when you repeat it back to me like that. It sounds insane.
Senior vice president of one of the most successful agencies on the planet.
Yeah.
In its simplest form, in one word, what made that possible?
In one word. That's a very good question. It's one of those, that's a tough question. In one word, I would say this is going to be a weird answer.
Sure.
I'm going to say, but I have to provide the backup context. Failure.
Okay.
Like, and what I mean by that is failure. I'm going to say failure made it possible, Kyle. Failure made it all possible. What I mean is, I have a gentleman in my life who I consider a mentor and a coach, and his name is Kevin Weaver, amazing guy. Kevin, in case you ever see this, and he once said to me, if you don't run out of gas in your career, if you don't like run out of gas and stall a couple times, meaning like fail hard a couple times in your career, like you weren't really trying.
Mm-hmm.
And he really advocated for taking swings at things that you were not sure you could do. And I think that the zigzag of my career reflects kind of leaning into that and being like, there were some zigs in my career that I just were hard changes as you obviously, I mean, we're not even going in depth. I could tell you even more, but like, and it was because I was willing to accept failure. Actually, Gary talks about that all the time. If you follow Gary Vaynerchuk, he talks about being willing to fail as a key attribute for success. So I'd say failure, and I'm going to cheat and give a second word of curiosity. Like I've just always been intellectually curious. I always want to grow. I don't think I will ever have the answers. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Those make sense, especially the curiosity one. I've talked about this with past guests, and as you know, I got young kids, so when they're real, they're still little, but we used to watch Sesame Street, and the one thing they always say is, "I wonder what if, let's try." And naturally, if you follow that curiosity, it's, you know, actually, I had a conversation with a team member the other day where they were pitching. I actually was pitching an idea, and they're like, "Yeah, sometimes Kyle ideas, they're not always great," you know. And he's kind of joking with me. I'm like, I think that's the whole game. Meaning, if it was so obvious, it would already been done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel like if you're naturally curious, you're going to stumble, you're going to fail, but it's about those reps. But I kind of want to double click into this because, and go a little deeper for those listening who are saying, maybe I feel burnt out, or kind of what's, and this is a macro question, so take it where you want, but how have you found the gauge of judgment when it relates to failing and trying again, or maybe getting stuck in a specific position, or maybe there's like a skill set you're not able to tackle? Where is that kind of resistance too much and it's time to maybe pursue something different? Because I think it's a fine line, especially for people, and I know a lot of people like this who can get tunnel visioned, right? And they kind of like go after a thing, but ultimately it's not going in the right direction, if that makes sense. So just like, how do you advise people on failure, but also when failure might be a little too much and it's time to reassess and maybe change course, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think for me, the litmus test is, not to sound cheesy, but I'm reducing this down as you're talking it through, I'm trying to reduce this down. Like as a principal, I try to put other people's interests before my own. If I am failing to a degree that it is holding back others or holding back the remit I was given for my employer that's paying me to do a job,
Sure.
then that's what causes me to evaluate. I think if you're only self first and you're one of those, dogged people that never quit, but you do that to the extent that it hurts others, or hurts is maybe too strong of a term in business, but I mean, if it's holding back others' growth and development, if it's holding back opportunity for others because you have to prove something, I think that's when the scale tips, right? Or if you are demonstrably, not fulfilling the remit, if you're being paid for a job and you accepted the task, you accepted X paycheck to do Y thing, and you're not fulfilling your end of the bargain demonstrably, I think you can fail. Like I have failed, and I'm sure you have too, within the context of a role, not to, we all have little failures along the way, little, big, medium, whatever, that are not job threatening failures, right? I mean, part of that depends on the trust that you have with the people above you. But there's a type of failure that limits others. And I think that's when it's selfish and you need to think about what your motivations are.
That's very insightful. And I want to go back to your career journey so you got failure, curiosity, but Facebook, when you said that you thought it was spam, what was it then? Because obviously you were there 5 years, so now you can look back and connect the dots. But what did they see in you specifically, your skill set or whatever it was, that made them reach out to you for that opportunity at Facebook?
I can actually answer that. It was 6 years. 6 years.
Sorry, 6 years.
I'm very proud of the 6th year.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I have a specific answer to that question. At that time, when Facebook first launched, early Facebook, like including when I arrived for the first couple of years, Facebook this was all new, and Facebook was trying to figure out what it was, and was trying to figure out what its value was. And we even had this little booklet that we used to give out. Man, if I could find mine somewhere, it was really cool. But I think the title of this, it was like a little book that Mark Zuckerberg had made, called Facebook was never supposed to be a company, or Facebook wasn't supposed to be a company, because it wasn't originally. It was called The Facebook because it was a lookbook for Harvard, right? Like, basically, they had a thing called a Facebook. That's where he got the name from. So there was a lot of thinking about, like, what was the thing and what value could it provide the world. And then eventually, of course, the businesses, when they had to make money to support the staff and all the growth and all that. So the first inclination when they went out to hire people to represent the company in the world of marketing and advertising, and this was the words that I was told by recruiters at the time, was they kind of filled the ranks with, like, people that used to sell banner ads, thinking it was like, well, it's a digital advertising play. And then they realized that in the context of an environment where you're sharing pictures of your engagement, or, you just got a new job. Back then, I showed, now you do it on LinkedIn, but you might have done it a little bit more on Facebook. I'm so excited I'm going to work at Yamava. Or, you scroll and you see someone's pictures from vacation in Hawaii. Content from a brand just showed up different and felt different. And they were looking for people that had backgrounds that were a little more rooted in human insight and human behavior. So at the time, I was working at a startup that was a word of mouth agency that was focused on the value of power of a recommendation. So we had 65 employees. I wasn't the only one they had hunted. There were, I think, 3 people that literally, out of the 65 employees we had at that time, this drove our founder nuts. He's a great guy. Google took 4 and Facebook took 3 of our 65. So 7 people, like, in a few months went. I was one of the ones that went to Facebook. So it was because, what they found and what they were looking for in me was, and what they kept digging into in my interviews. I had 14 interviews. It was crazy. Was human insight. That's what they felt they needed to tell the story of this new thing called social media, and to understand the value and how, because we were figuring out what it was worth to brands. We didn't know.
I'm curious, the value of a recommendation. From your standpoint, with the insights that you've learned throughout your career, what is the value? I mean, because there's marketers listening to this and people who are in operations. What is the value of a recommendation?
It can cut through the clutter of we're all inundated in marketing messages, and when a recommendation comes from a trusted source, right? And specifically in this context, it was a friend. We were always talking about the power of the people graph. Now that has changed. All the platforms have changed their algorithms to interest graph because of TikTok. But back then, the graph, and it was Facebook owned the game. It was the people graph. People, places, and things that you cared about. That was the graph. So in that context, when a friend of yours recommended going to a casino or a restaurant or a hotel, that you have a frame of reference of living life, the lens, the experiences they look through, and when they evaluate an experience, you're going to know what it means versus just having been served something that looks like an ad.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
to me, and I think we'll touch on this a little later, but like, I just wanted to stop there because I feel like that's so powerful, the value of a recommendation. I feel like in a 2024 environment, we're so focused on AI and all these ways of optimizations and, how can we make the best impressions and CPMs and all this stuff, right? But at the end of the day, the experience is what matters. And to your point, if it's a casino, if it's a restaurant, if it's a small brick and mortar, whatever it may be, if I could just drive value, do the right thing, they're going to go tell their friend, who's going to tell their friend. And that is, to your point, 10 times more powerful. And a lot of times they're going to go beyond just a recommendation. They're going to interact with your environment. They'll take a picture, etc.
Yeah.
But so often we're focused on all the other stuff when really it's right in front of our face and it could scale in ways it couldn't before.
100%. And that's also why social is still, in my opinion, I'm biased, but I'm not biased because I think the data bears out the fact that that's why social is still growing in relevance and power for advertisers, because when you make stuff that doesn't look so much like an ad, you can't completely fuel a business on, this was the challenge of the startup that I was in Boston. You can't solely track in a meaningful way, like a media buy, word of mouth. It's really difficult to do. Okay.
Yeah.
But social media and the environment of social media, you are amongst friends. So even the right type of content from a brand, even in that environment, has more impact over time than seeing something that looks like a straight up ad, like a television commercial, right?
Right.
So there's shades of it. But then when someone goes and your property, your casino or your restaurant or your hotel or your resort delivers the goods, and you generate those actual, recommendations from your customers, that's when you're printing money. That's gold.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to jump to a segment here we call the bigger picture, where I'm going to show a picture, a video clip. You don't know what I'm going to show, but we're just
you didn't prepare me for this. What's this?
Yeah, so let's go. Here we go.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
So we're kind of on the subject, so I wanted to jump to it.
Okay.
So we got a picture of you and some of the brain trust there at Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. But it's kind of what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
And 3.27 billion daily users on a Meta product every single day. So that's 40% of the world population. I was listening, I can't remember what podcast I was listening to, but I had to play it again. I was like, did I hear that right? And this was reported on Meta's Q2 earnings call. So I guess first part is, maybe that was before your time at Facebook. Actually, you said, I think I remember in your origin story, you maybe dabbled with social media a little bit, but not a lot. At what point in your career were you like, yeah, this is going to be a real thing and a tool, the power of it and the responsibility of it, and just the way it's interacting in our lives now? 40% of the globe. When did you kind of know, oh, this is a big thing?
I first want to say for your listening audience, because it's going to sound like when I said you didn't prepare me for this, and then a picture of me pops up, that makes it sound like I'm faking, because obviously I provided this photo. But I was not prepared for this. I didn't know what you're going to do with this photo, and I didn't know you were going to pop these numbers up. I didn't understand. So I just want everyone to know, I was being honest. I really wasn't prepared for this. In case you don't recognize him, it's Mark in the middle of that photo, and the woman in the scarf is Sheryl Sandberg, for anyone who can't tell. When did I know? I honestly don't think I knew. I knew Facebook was going to be something. I think I mentioned I had 14 interviews. About halfway, I was working. I had a good job. And about halfway through, I was like, this is ridiculous. I've had 7 interviews and I had no idea if I was any closer to getting the job or not. And I was going to tap out. I was going to like, I don't need this that bad. And one of my friends kind of grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me and said, no, look, it's Facebook. trust me, you need to like stick with it. And, I had 7 more interviews, and then I had to go before a panel. It's not like that. They don't do this anymore, but man, back then it's crazy.
Wow. Yeah.
When I joined Facebook, this is really interesting because I didn't know this number was going to pop up on screen, but here's the context. When I joined Facebook in February or November 2010, we had 400 million users globally.
Wow.
So I'm looking at this number, 3.27 billion. We had 400 million users, and I remember that at that time everyone was tripping out because only a few months before that it was 100 million. And only a year before that, or 2 years before that, they had just opened it up to go off of college campuses. Because at first you had to have an email address from a university. I think when there were a couple of moments working at Facebook where I think things that I were thinking back. One was when I first heard the term technological lock. Have you heard of that?
I have not.
So there was a term that I learned from I think it was from an engineer, a software engineer at Facebook, called technological lock, and it's basically the concept in technology when some sort of user interface or application becomes there is a point at which something becomes so widely distributed that it is hard to unwind it from daily use. And there were like social scientists and technologists that felt like, I don't know what number it was that we hit. Maybe it was because we were at 1 billion. I think we were at 2 billion while I was there. When they started throwing that term around, technological lock, and I understood what it meant, that hit me. I remember thinking like, yeah, like there's no way to there's no way to get this toothpaste back in the tube now. People have been using this for their birth announcements, for their all of my photos. Everything I've been doing is now there. I remember the first time that the first survey, and it was probably in 2012 or 13, when it tipped that when people, I think it was Michael Jackson's death. And there was a survey that CNN or Gallup did on where people first heard of Michael Jackson's death, and Facebook was the #1 place.
Oh wow!
Yeah, that's so specific, right?
Yeah,
but it was meaningful because
that was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. I remember that when he died, and a survey went out, where did you first hear about it? People said Facebook. That was a meaningful moment, and we used that in meetings because we're like, look, this is the real world now, right? Like you didn't hear about it from USA Today or CNN.com or from some newscaster night. You heard about it on Facebook. And then I think the other one, real quickly, I'll mention is this is like more of a soft answer. Like I think those are more data driven answers, but a softer answer was we had social scientists who were like literally just tasked with studying human behavior and understand, because we, not for no nefarious reason, we just wanted to understand what was going on. It was all new. And we were trying to figure out things like how many friends can a person actually have on Facebook meaningfully? Like if you have 1,000 friends on Facebook, are you meaningfully interacting with 1,000 people? And the reason that we cared about that was it affected like how we thought about advertising and things like that. Turns out the answer is 150, in case anyone wants to know, which is like the size of old villages. There's fascinating connections between our social behaviors and social media and in history. But anyway, I was like, it was a soft thing, but like when we had people internally teaching us about social science and social behavior, and I realized how hardwired our behavior on Facebook was to real life, that also helped me to think like, oh yeah, this is it. Like we're never going back from here.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is I feel like it took a long time for people to kind of realize this. I'll provide a personal example. I remember going to a casino conference. I was still early in my career, 2011 might have been, and the panel was direct mail or social media. Like And I remember going to the panel, and the kind of the overall narrative was like, look, yes, social's gaining traction, but that's still something the intern can do. Direct mail is a physical piece, and it holds more value. You needed to have actual resources there, and you can have the intern do social. And it was just like, even then, it was like just so kind of just thrown to the side. And I love your guys' yes and mentality, which I'll get to in a minute. Yeah. But I just feel like, from a macro statement, it just took a while for people to really take social seriously, especially from a business tool, a marketing tool. And that kind of leads to my next slide. And I feel like VaynerMedia's kind of had this. When I look at the ad industry, and take this question if you want, I'm curious to know your perspective. I feel like it took a while for the ad agency to kind of take you guys serious, right? And then now you see this headline from Ad Age, which puts you on the A list that says VaynerMedia didn't just rule social media in 2023, it rewrote the rule book. So I guess the first part before we dive into this is, for those who are not familiar with VaynerMedia, what's kind of the 1 minute high level spiel on what's VaynerMedia's philosophy as it relates to advertising and marketing?
I'm going to add the quick origin story for VaynerMedia, which is that if you don't know Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V, you can follow him on Instagram. His family were immigrants from Belarus. They landed in New Jersey when he was 3 years old. He worked in his dad's wine shop until he was in his mid-30s. YouTube came out, and he was one of the first people that figured out that you could use YouTube. He, instead of faxing wine specials to people, he would do wine reviews. He was like the original influencer, and he started VaynerMedia, our company, 14 years ago as a business person. He did not have a background in advertising, and I think that is a really fundamental thing to understand about our company. He was not beholden to the model of advertising that existed since the mid-50s, which was all TV based, and we can go into that. He was just like, I just want to do that works. And so he was very like not ego driven about like what it took to do that. You asked the philosophy then of, or can you repeat now that I've given that, I felt like that was important context. Now repeat the question.
Kind of what's VaynerMedia's approach or philosophy, for those who are not familiar, of your guys' take on marketing and advertising?
Got it. Okay. So for those who, well, I'm not old enough to remember this myself. I was going to say, for those who are not old enough to remember, but I'm not old enough to remember. I just know this is true. Advertising became $1 billion industry. Television advertising became $1 billion industry in the late 50s. And a model of making creative was born around that. And that model was that client gives an agency a brief. It's Mad Men. It's Mad Men. Just watch the television show Mad Men.
Yep.
And the agency goes away and comes up, they're smart people, come up with some, 3 or 6 really great ideas based on how much they know culture and how cool they are. The client narrows it down to their 2 or 3 favorite. The agency shines them up, gives them back. The client picks one, and then you pay millions of dollars to send it into the world, and you pray that you were right. And that model, it's insane, especially having worked at such a disruptive place like Facebook and Instagram. That model really still, 2024, people are having a hard time shaking that. I can think of few places that are so entrenched as the advertising industry. It's wild to me. But most people still think with that mindset, even today. Gary's approach, the simple answer to our philosophy is, why in the world would you trust 6 people or 10 people in a room to come up with your ideas that you're going to spend your really valuable marketing budget, millions of dollars, potentially to make the content, and then many millions of dollars to distribute that content to the world, when you can try things out with the most amazing focus group in the world, which is free to distribute on, which is social media? Why would you not first try some things, go consumer first, bottom up, relevance starts in culture, and see what works first that way. You have to check your ego at the door, which is probably why the industry hasn't changed much, because people who've been in advertising a long time have built their careers on being right, or like having a good gut feeling about things. And there's another word for that, and that's subjectivity. And it holds things back. So our basic philosophy is, why would you do that? Why would you take that risk with your money when you can try things, learn? It's almost like going to a horse race and knowing what horse is going to win before ever putting your bet down. I think the way that we do it, I think, is.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can relate to this with that model. And then I feel like everyone's worked on teams like this where there's so many layers of approval, and then at the end of the day, it's a Frankenstein execution anyways, right? It's like, well, I like that, but I don't like this. Well, my boss kind of likes this part of it. And then the things put out there, whether it's TV, creative, radio, whatever it may be, and it's a Frankenstein. It's just, and to your point, I think there's so much opportunity there.
I have to highlight a word that you just said, and you said it, and it's like. Yeah. That is a creativity killer in any organization. Yeah. By the way, agencies too, right? Maybe agencies the most, but client. So it's funny because like you're kind of over here, and every time I want to like say something serious, I look at. I don't know if it's like people who are listening to me.
Yeah.
The phrase I like is a creativity killer. That is subjectivity, and it is where opportunity goes to die, because it's totally subjective, right? Like, it just really requires all of us to check that at the door and realize what we're doing, and focus on the data and focus on creating stuff that the customer likes.
Yeah, and I don't want to go too deep in here too, but you mentioned it earlier, and it's just the change in social that's happened relatively recently, which is, you all point this out and Gary points this out, which is the TikTokification of content. And I've experienced this personally where, my wife started kind of a creative outlet Instagram account 10 months ago, and she doesn't film herself. She doesn't film her kids. And she went from 0 followers to 30,000 followers in 10 months without spending a dime.
Yep.
Right. And that's the opportunity that's out there for everybody, where as long as you put valuable content out there, the algorithm, one, will help you with the targeting to find the right audience. And 2, you can actually grow a business literally with nothing, as long as you kind of have, once again, going back to the value, as long as it's valuable and the algorithm finds it valuable, it can scale, it can grow, and you can literally go from 0 to 30 to 100 or whatever it may be, where people, and Gary talks about this better than anybody, where you literally can take your interest and turn it into a business. And it's just crazy.
Can I take a moment to explain what the TikTokification of content means?
Yes, please do.
So here's what that means. I said this earlier, so this is drawing a red thread through this conversation. Facebook exploded by focusing on the people graph. So the simplest way to explain this is, everyone who's listening who has had social media for more than 5 years can probably remember a time on Instagram and Facebook when the only content they received or saw on their feed was something from their friends and ads.
Yep.
Something from their friends and ads. Maybe a friend of a friend, if someone commented on if one of your friends commented on someone else's post and that person didn't have their privacy set, you might see that friend of a friend's post. TikTok changed that to, we're not going to limit it to who people follow. If someone seems to, because there's something called dwell time. It's when you have your phone and you're scrolling with your thumb and you stop on something. Even if you don't click on it, the platforms measure how long you sit there. So man, it sure seems like this person is always stopping on hunting dog content. Okay. They were the ones that figured out, we're just going to serve them more hunting dog content, because all we care about is time spent on the platform. Right. And that's how TikTok exploded. Now all of us, on Facebook and Instagram, guess what they did? They took away the limitation of only seeing something from your friends or their friends of friends. Now all of us are getting content from all kinds of places, right?
Yeah.
So the TikTokification is specifically the change from platform, from people-focused algorithm to interest-focused algorithm, because
Yeah.
it increased the amount of time that we all spend.
Yeah, and you hit it. And I think another way that I've heard this phrase, it's almost like people before, prior to this, people and businesses were more like CRM and databases, right? Where I want to get as many followers as I can, to your
Yeah.
point. But now it's more of a free market and there's more opportunity. But it takes some nuance to get your head around that. We could go forever on that, but I do want to switch to this slide, which is your boss. So on the right, I have a whole bunch of pictures, because honestly, if I were to put all the content that Gary puts out there, all the things he's known for, I would need like 5 slides, right? Between, you said, his wine story, obviously with his well-documented chase for the Jets, which he has a really touching video on his Instagram that people should watch.
Oh yeah.
Talking about what that jersey means to him, his mom, and possibly one day putting it out there. But what I love most about that story is just it's more about the journey rather than the thing. And he's said that, like, he's actually wondered if the day that it does happen, that he actually might be bummed out, because that lifelong chase is over. I got the Smurf hit, he obviously has videos about Monday, garage sailing, pickleball, VCon, right? Like, there's just so many different things. So my question to you is kind of, what is true about kind of the Gary V facade, what all the content he puts out there, but then also on the other side, maybe something that that maybe not a lot of people know about, as far as Gary Vaynerchuk, your boss.
Okay. Interesting. I think that Gary V, the persona, if you go in his, if you follow him on Instagram, you see all that content. I will say this: he means everything he says. He is brash, yes. Drops F-bombs like nobody's business. His style, the way he communicates, is not everyone's cup of tea. And he says some things that are polarizing. But he's honest and he means everything he says. So, like, as far as, like, there's not, like, maybe the way he presents himself is different because it's, a public forum. So I think his energy level is different, and his presentation might be different as Gary V, the public personality. But what he's saying is consistent. He doesn't change. Gary V and Gary in my phone is not different in that sense.
Okay.
He's very, when you see these touching, like you mentioned the touching story about the Jets, you're talking about his mom.
Yep.
Yeah. So for anyone who hasn't seen it, he has content about his parents, Sasha, and I can't remember his mom's name at the moment, but he brings his parents everywhere. Like in real life, I've been to the Cannes Festival of Creativity for Advertising in France, on the south coast of France, 3 times now, I think, with Vayner. His parents are always there. It's hilarious. They're like, and they're amazing. They're like the most charming older couple. But Gary, it's like real, like they're there. They're there to support Gary, and so all that's real. As far as the other question you asked, maybe something people don't know. I think people would be surprised. I know I was. I was surprised, like any person would be, if you didn't get to know him. He is very, and here, this is perfect. This is going to explain the surprise. One of the things he talks about a lot is like how he barely graduated high school.
Mm-hmm.
He has a report card in his office behind him that shows how he got, like, he like almost flunked his last, and he says, "I thank my math teacher." I can't remember. I think my math teacher gave me a D, and I will be forever grateful for that D, because it sounds crazy. He goes, because she saw something in me. And you're like, how did her giving you a D mean that she saw something in you? And he says, because if I got an F, I would have not graduated high school. Mm-hmm. And I think he was like second to the bottom of his class. And he talks a lot about hustle culture, and you don't have to have, you don't have to have higher education. He doesn't bag on higher education, but you don't have to have it to succeed. People would be very surprised how intellectually and book smart he is. When you hear that, you would think all he talks about is like the Jets and Pokemon cards. But I've been at dinner tables with him where he's talking about history, like stuff that I have friends that were history majors that might not remember. Like, he's a real student. He's a student of the world. He's a student of people and culture and historical events. And he can talk to you about a lot of things in world history in a way that many people who got history degrees cannot. That surprises me. He does it. Very, very smart guy.
Yeah. I've found that, like, because I mentioned earlier, I'm a podcast nerd. So I listen to tons of podcasts. And I started listening to Gary like in 2015. And I found that, like, if you catch, like, if like my dad was in the car, this actually happened, and I were to play Gary, if you can't get over kind of like the Jersey kind of brashness and you just hear him once, like, some people are like, oh, he's too bold or whatever. But what I have found that, like, if you actually listen to what he's saying, like you mentioned hustle, like, I know that he's actually gone away from that word because it's been twisted to mean burnout.
Yep.
And he's like doubled down on, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying to do things until you burn out. I'm saying to follow what makes you happy. Like, happiness is the best success, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you don't like your job, right, to like find the opportunities to put you on that path where, so I think that's one thing with, is just someone who listens to a lot of podcasts, and Gary, I feel like if you hear him in just a short clip with clickbait culture, he could be misunderstood. But when you actually listen, it's fully,
especially try to find, to anyone who's interested, like, try to find some longer form Gary content where you get to hear him talk for maybe 10 minutes. Because then you get some context around some of these sound bites, and you realize he's very purposeful in the things that he says. For Instagram, these things are cut down. But find one of his longer form interviews. He's really compelling.
And it's so funny. We're just real quickly here on the one of the final pitch meetings, when Gary called in for us, he said the word baloney. He didn't cuss, and I'm like, yeah, this is not the guy that I know.
He did. That's right. He did say baloney. That's right. That's really funny.
Yeah. So I got a video here I want to play, and I just want to get your thoughts on the end of it. There's so many Gary videos.
This is another one I'm not prepared for.
But this one's from 2018, and it kind of correlates to some of the things we've touched on. But I'll get your thoughts on the other side of it.
I call it the Taylor Swift rule. So I think Taylor Swift hacked culture. What Taylor Swift's very good at is she knows that when people tweet her and say, Taylor, come to my wedding and sing me a song, she actually does it. Here's why she does it. The 75-minute allocation of her time to do something like that is not ROI positive for Taylor based on what she makes for her time. However, the amplification of doing something that makes no sense on paper is where she gets all her value. So I get yelled at by all my smartest CEO friends, the most fancy gals and guys on earth, for still answering all these tweets and emails and replying one by one on Snapchat. But I know that depth is far more interesting than width in a world where the width has just become completely obnoxiously loud and impossible to break through. You scale the unscalable if you want to break through the noise today.
So that was 2016. I was just like, that's one of those ones where I think about, or I actually use this from time to time. But curious to know your thoughts on that minute clip.
Well, okay, first I have to tell you, it's funny. I didn't know you were going to show that. That first shot where she's playing a piano and he says at someone's wedding, and you see a couple dancing, that was one of my friend's brothers, like brother-in-law.
No way.
A guy, yeah, I mean, literally, he recently reshared it. What a small world, but yeah, I won't say their name, but a guy that I worked with at Facebook, he and his wife arranged that. She's the one that reached out to Taylor, and I won't go into there was some stuff going on with that family I won't go into, but it was really special. So what do you want to know about, Kyle? What do you want my opinion about exactly?
I was just curious if that video, like, if you have any thoughts on it, because I'll start with myself. Like, to me, why I use that from time to time, not maybe in a certain context, but when you talk about value and once again, like not being ROI positive, I think this is a great example of thinking beyond. Like I think about the Nike movie Air, and they kind of show the 10 principles of Nike. The number 10, if we do the, and I'm reading it right here, if we do the right things, we'll make money damn near automatic. And I feel like so often, like I said, no matter what you're doing, just to like do the right thing. And that's what I feel like this example with Taylor Swift is. If yes, I could make more money in a 4-hour period if I go do a concert. But if I make time to change this person's life and to actually go to the wedding and do this performance, and I do that again and again and again, I'm building a brand and a following. And she's not doing it out of that sense, I don't think. I'm not the Taylor Swift expert here. But my guess is she's uber successful and an icon because she has a connection with her fans because of what she does, right? So once again, zooming out, sure, like as Gary points out, she can make way more money doing a concert. She can make way more money doing an appearance fee. But to do these little micro moments of doing what's right for her fans and connect in a way, that's how she scales the unscalable, as Gary puts it. And I feel like those opportunities are out there everywhere, no matter where you're at in your business, whether you work in casino, entertainment, marketing, whatever it may be. I think that's the right lens to think through.
So, yeah, okay. So I'm going to add some words that he did not use, but he would use if he was with us right now. And they're also words that a creative leader that I worked with at Instagram and Facebook used to say. I think it's true of people and brands, but we'll talk in the context of a brand or a business. And that is like the most basic litmus test should always be, am I creating value?
Yeah.
Right? For others. Create value, create value, create value. Whether it's in the content that you're making, if it's a little bit of delight in someone's day, it may be educational, whatever. Create value. So I think you just never lose if you're not sure to do something. And, you know, to the point of what he said here and what you're suggesting about, you might not see, you know, if you're only chasing the dollar every single time, it's going to be, what's the saying, like getting water from a stone. Like you're going to hit the bottom of that barrel at some point. You have to focus on creating value. If you focus on creating value, whatever you're looking for in ROI is going to come back to you. You know what I mean? And by the way, if you're creating value and it's authentic and the money's not coming to you, then you're probably doing the wrong thing. Right. I don't mean in creating value. I mean, something's wrong with your product or service. You got to tweak it.
Yeah.
Right. But you get to the truth that way. But if you focus on creating value, you can't lose. I guess that would be my summary.
100%. Yeah. And I want to switch gears a little bit because, you know, you've had so many different stops in your career. Like I said, from t-shirts and social work to the senior vice president. And I guess it could be Gary, it could be someone else, it could be whomever. But if there's like, if I were to say, Jonathan, what's the most valuable advice you've been given from somebody you worked with, either a boss or it could be a colleague, whatever. And maybe it's not one thing, but something that comes to mind as I say that. What would that advice be?
I'm thinking of a theme when I think of people that I've really respected and learned a lot from, which include Gary, our managing director in here, Lisa Buckley, Kevin Weaver that I mentioned, who was a mentor. There was a really important leader that a lot of people didn't hear about at Facebook named David Fisher. People first. It sounds so cheesy, but I'm not talking about just being friendly. I'm talking about if you put the training and resources development of people, the right working conditions, clear mandates for what people, clear expectations for what people will be doing in a healthy, non-toxic environment. You take care of your employees, create a strong culture. If you have a strong culture, people will know what to do when you're not in the room, right? All those ingredients of putting your teams first, everything else will follow. So you're a leader and you're coming into a new situation. Focus first on making sure your leadership team is right. Like the numbers will follow, right? You can't get lost in the spreadsheets first. You have to do that stuff. but as priority, so many leaders that I've worked for that succeeded and that and see and I respected as people said the same thing. People first in a business context. If you get that right, talent, recruiting, all those things, the results will follow.
And is there a tangible example you could provide? And I'll give it through this context. Say someone's listening to this right now and they're a first-time supervisor or they're a first-time manager. It's kind of their first role where, hey, I'm leading a few people. Obviously, I've been given this position because they see potential in me. But is there a tangible example when you say a people-first culture of something that like, hey, I think this is beneficial no matter what your role is? Is there a tangible example you can provide as far as something they can implement around this idea of people-first culture?
Wow, you're really putting me on the spot. So many answers I could give. A tangible example of something a new manager or leader could do to put people first. I think it's something to help your person, your people, and yourself is maintaining a constant dialogue about making sure they have what they need to achieve the goals that you've given them.
Okay.
Because it tends to like clarify. It's a really clarifying function. If you are focused on making sure, like I actually remember I worked for one company that had a Water Boy award. It was a leadership award, but it was called, or the Water Girl. And the analogy was like the person on the baseball team or a sports team that was running around with the Gatorade bottle and making sure, that was actually a leadership award. And it was on the model of servant leadership. Translating that into something a little more practical, like what I'm saying is if you maintain a dialogue with your people, which is based on, have I provided the resources to you that you need to fulfill the remit I've given you? That will force a couple of things. One is, well, force is the wrong word. That will cause a couple of things. One, they're going to feel supported by you because you're asking them if they have what they need. Two, it's going to cause them to think if they have what they need to complete the job. So it's going to give them ownership, right? Because they're being offered, and it's going to create ownership in them. Three, it's also going to surface if they understand what the remit is or not. Because if they, you know what I mean? Like if they don't know how to answer the question, shame on you as a leader. That means that you haven't made it clear to them what they need to be doing. Yep. So I think if you focus, that's one thing you can do. One specific thing you can do is keep an open dialogue and drive conversations with your people. Do they have what they need from you to do the thing you've asked them to do?
And I think that's I love that example because I know so many high performers that kind of don't want to ask questions, right? Like they kind of wear that responsibility, that arrangement, that agreement, that task, that project, whatever it may be. And just to your point, allowing that space to check in, hey, build that relationship, but also make sure that they do feel fulfilled on that end. I think that's huge. Jonathan's pivoting a little bit here. You know what? There's something. I'm sorry. I'm doing this to you. You're gonna be like, what?
I'm sorry. I'm scared.
You're gonna be like, what? It's like because I was like, oh, I think I'm done with the next level picture.
I only gave you 2 pictures and you used both of them, so I cannot imagine what's.
Well, this next one was on your LinkedIn, and when I saw it, it's always something I wanted to double click on.
Oh shit!
And so this is yeah, and so because people look at you, I look at you right as somebody who's successful in their career, but ultimately, I know you're a family man. Like people look at you and probably say, "How do you juggle both?" Right? How can you be a career-minded individual, whether you're a mother, a father, or someone who's got tons of responsibility on the home front? But then also, you want to be career driven and continue to grow and excel at whatever that may look like. So here's the post you did. He said, "Happy Father's Day. Here's to all the dads that struggle with guilt of their travel and work schedules, find gaps to make their kids' games and concerts, work late at night, but still get up on time to do the school run, and then eventually support their kids on their own journeys of finding meaning and a living wage. It's worth it. Hashtag Father's Day." So it's a broad question. I know it's a hard question, but for people listening here who want to try to, I don't know if balance is the right word. That's always kind of the question. But if somebody says, I want to be successful in my career and, continue to grow, but also want to be successful in the home front and be a dad or mom or whatever that may be. What advice would you give on that end?
Man, you got real serious. I was not expecting this. First of all, I want everyone to know that those are my 4 children. That's Levi, Bailey, Isaiah, and Ava. And that was only a few months ago at my daughter Bailey's graduation from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. So yeah, I got really emotional when you just pulled this up. Okay, I don't know if this is going to be a provocative answer or not, but I'm going to just speak my truth for what it's worth, and everyone has a different journey.
Yep.
When we are all done, when you move on, someday you will not be at Yamava, and maybe, and you'll go somewhere else, whatever your career. Someday I'll move on from VaynerMedia, and when we're all done with these jobs, no one's going to give a shit. I have seen the most successful, wildly successful, white hot executives, and the day on LinkedIn that they mention they've moved on from something or they're retired, it's the next day it's like they never existed. I mean, very, very seldom is it different than that. So I think I don't know, like this, I want to say something pithy like you can have it all and it's about work-life balance.
Sure.
I think talking that way is not meaningful. I think it's nice, but I don't know if it really reflects the struggle. And I think, look, I've gone through a divorce. I did some things that were I missed things. So this post that I wrote is not written as a person who made all the games, and there were some things I didn't make, and there were some places when I fell down, right? Fortunately, I think you can see in this photo we're in good shape. But I think here's the deal. I think you have to be really clear-eyed and honest with yourself. No one's going to give a shit no one's going to care that you worked at Yamava. No one's going to care that I worked at VaynerMedia. It's not going on your tombstone. Yeah. And when the choices come, I pick my father and my husband role. That's me. I'm telling you my truth.
Sure.
And everyone has to decide that for themselves, right? Like that's just real talk. So when I have to choose, it's father, husband. And I'll tell you a really, do we have like another minute for me to talk about?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to tell you a really specific story, because unfortunately divorce is a reality for a lot of people. And this is, real talk. When I got divorced, I was living in Riverside, California, which is about an hour and a half outside of Los Angeles, for those people that don't know Southern California. And I knew at that time, I remembered that I had so many friends that had gone through divorces, and I had this tape in my head of like, Nancy and Joe got divorced and Joe moved to Texas, or so-and-so and Bill moved to Arizona, whatever. Yeah. And I remember it struck me like, what does getting divorced have to do with them still being a parent? And it always bugged me, like why these people were moving away from their kids. So I remember that when I got divorced, I sat down with my kid's mom and we sat down with them, and I told them, I said, I will not live more than 10 minutes away from your mom. And I remember in my brain being like I'm killing my career, because I lived in Riverside. And if you don't know Southern California, Riverside is not a center of advertising or marketing or things that I was doing. But it was just, I was like, whatever, right? Like that it is what it is, because it was the right choice. And I told them that, and didn't make the divorce any easier, but it gave them some confidence about our relationship and what role I was going to play. And this was before all the successes. This was before Facebook, before my career took off. I made that choice, and things worked out. And if they hadn't, and if I were working in a lawnmower factory in Corona, fine, right? Right. But I think you have to make some tough choices, and I think you have to decide what you're willing to sacrifice, and be honest, and you have to keep your word to your family members. Okay, sorry, this is like a passionate topic for me. Keep your word.
Yeah.
Whether it's to your wife, if you're a woman, to your husband, to your partner, whatever your situation is, and your kids, keep your word. Because if you can't always be there, but you keep your word, that will mean a lot. That
Yeah.
trust builds a lot of safety and security.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know I took you down a door
No,
where you're
man.
like, where, Kyle? But
That's real. That's real life, though. We can't pretend, right?
no,
Like that's
and
real life.
it's a big part of what this platform is about. If it's truly about helping people and thinking about the next level of their career, whatever that may look like for them. And the goal of this is literally just to take one or two things from every guest and hopefully they can apply it to themselves. And that's honestly, I think the two biggest questions we get to this platform is it one, how do you find a mentor? Mentorship is always a big one because people always feel like, well, if I have a relationship with someone, I can learn from something. You know, that's one of the buckets. The other one is work-life balance. Like that's the other one of like, well, how do these people do it? How do they manage it? And what does that look like? So I think it's important to have kind of these real conversations and thank you for opening up. And I agree with a lot. I mean, at least just from my only advice I could provide on this is just like to your point, your word, try to keep your word.
Yeah.
That's critical. And, you know, also with my family, it's being very intentional about, hey, these next 2 weeks are going to be rough, right?
Yep.
Or this next month, there's gonna be a lot of traveling, but where are those little pockets where instead of flying out Friday or Thursday, I'm gonna stay to get an extra night and morning with the kids.
Yeah.
And try to be creative to, you know, pick your spots. But then to your point, have that constant dialogue. You know, if you say gonna be somewhere, be it, unless it's mission critical.
Yeah.
Right. So
by the way, what you just described is a form of keeping your word because you're setting expectations, right? You're being honest.
Right.
Like don't skirt around and don't pretend. Don't live in guilt.
Yeah.
But like if it's a priority to you, figure out, like you said, you got to work. Like, hey, the next 2 weeks are going to be rough, but here's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then do the thing, and that will create safety, emotional safety, and trust in your family, which is what they're looking for from you, right?
Yep. Jonathan, thank you for doing the pod. I got a couple of final questions here for you.
Yeah.
Going forward, what excites you for the future? So like when you think about the next 5 years or so, kind of where's your head at as far as like, you know, what excites you for the future?
Like in advertising?
Anything.
Wow, Kyle.
Lobbing it up to you, man.
I'm excited to lose 20 pounds. Very excited about that. I'm on a diet. It's going to happen this time. I'm really excited about it.
I think for you, I mean, I'll kind of point it in direction then. I mean, look at the growth. Look at the growth, right, of VaynerMedia. Look at the LA office. You guys just changed offices. Yeah. I feel like you guys have just been grow, go, right? Yeah. All the momentum's kind of fallen with you guys. So like from that standpoint, I mean, from an outside perspective, it feels like you guys have this tremendous momentum.
Okay.
So do I have that right? Is there exciting things around the corner or kind of what are you looking forward to?
See how risky it is to ask me an open-ended question? I start talking about weight loss. I'll tell you what I think. So we have a little internal mantra about like how much advertising sucks. Like advertising sucks.
We ruin everything. We ruin
literally, right? Like look up there's a term for it. The language history of the word is literally, it's an interruption.
Yeah.
Okay. That's like in Old English. It's like there's like a root meaning of the word. It's an interruption. It sucks. Mm-hmm. Now it also is what makes a lot of the things that we do free because we deal with advertising or reduce cost. What I'm excited about is that while the industry has been so slow to move and so slow to adopt, data does tend to win arguments when people's jobs are on the line. And I do see CMOs, and we work with big companies, Yamava, Visa, Alaska Airlines, Pepsi, big brands. Yep. Indeed, the job website. I see a lot of CMOs coming around and understanding that the old way of doing creative is not only monetarily inefficient, but doesn't work. And as a human on the other side of it, it sucks for me. I hate the shit I see on TV or in my feed when someone runs like a traditional 15-second TV ad as an asset in Instagram,
Yeah.
I skip right by it. I don't care. I skip right by it, right? So what I'm excited about is that as companies come around and start changing their model, the way you guys have and others, it's going to make our experience as consumers better, right? So it's not only going to be, it's going to, because the reason they're changing is because the results are better for the companies. And the reason the results are better is that the stuff is more relevant to us as consumers. So like money will win, right? Like money will win the argument. And money is starting to win the argument that this approach to creative, like being consumer first and being bottoms up instead of top down, I like, is going to make, it's going to make our daily user experience when we pick up our phones more pleasant, because we're going to see stuff that's more to our liking and more interesting.
Yeah. And by the way, it's always been this way. And I think something you said there, it kind of reminds me of a saying I like to use here, not just on my advertising duties or media duties, but also with the promotions events team, the guest services team, the VIP services team. And it's, does your impression make an impression? Right? Like, and that's not just social. Like if you're on out of home, to your point, it's a disruption. So if I'm going to try to disrupt you and say, hey, look over here, I might as well at least try to do so in a way that makes an actual impression and potential reach versus actual reach. I mean, we could go on a tangent on that, but I think that applies not only just to marketing and advertising and make sure it's native to the channel, that applies to customer experience.
Yep.
Right. Like if I'm face to face with someone, you know, good guest service when you see it. Do they beat the greet? Do they say good morning to you? Good afternoon? If they ask, how are you doing? Is it out of a genuine place? Right. Like literally from acquisition all the way to loyalty, to fandom, and to every single touch point on the customer journey. And ultimately it's about building relationships. It's, did your impression make an impression?
Yep.
And I think to your point, so often it's not. And I love that example, right? We're going to take this 15-second TV spot and we're just going to run it everywhere else, right? And we're not going to think about the platforms and be intentional about it. So it's huge.
Early days. So I used to run like part of the entertainment business for Instagram and Facebook. We would go to movie studios and talk to the CMOs, the marketing teams, because now remember, this was early day. Now today, this is going to sound like, no, it can't be. But back then, this was all new. They would take a 2-minute trailer, like the kind you would see when you go to the movies and before a movie.
Yeah.
It was formatted this way. And the first 8 seconds would be the green band that said this. This is true.
Yeah.
True story. I can vividly remember, I won't say what studio it was, the CMO and all the creative leads. They were mad because they were like, hey, we're running our trailers and it's not driving we can't tell that it's driving interest. And we were like, yeah, because you're running a 2-minute piece of content in a square and you formatted it this way so it's tiny, and you have the first 8 seconds. Is that you think someone's going to sit there and wait for 8 seconds? This is not a movie theater. You have to change. And back then, I remember being in the hall with one of them, and he referenced a famous director that we were involved in this movie, and he said he will never allow us to make it square because he'd say it would erode the integrity of the art.
Oh boy.
Well, it's like, well, good luck. I hope the movie does well.
Yeah.
Now look at movie trailers on Instagram. You'll see first 3 seconds, it's always bang, bang, bang.
Right.
Title card, trailer.
Yep.
They got that from us. Like we showed them the insight, right? And every after that, everything changed.
Yeah. 100%.
Anyway.
2 last questions for you here. Advice to your younger self. So of all the knowledge you've gained and all the stops in your career and your title now, just if you could go back to Jonathan starting day one, whether that was at the social work or whether the t-shirt job you had, what advice would you give to that person?
I would probably say don't stress out so much, because it doesn't. I've been very successful. People ask me all the time, what did you do? Because I had my amazing, run at early days at Facebook and Instagram, and then now working for Gary, and I get a lot of requests for advice, but they don't see underneath the amount of stress like a normal human being that I had. It wasn't like I was floating along, like, making a lot of great decisions all the time, right? Like I bumbled my way into a lot of things, and I carried a lot of stress with me. And to my younger self, I'd say, like, dude, it's not going to help you to just chill out. It's just job stuff. So I'd say just have more fun and don't stress out so much, because it's not going to change the outcome. Right?
Yeah.
I could have had all the same outcome. Maybe I'd even be further along without stressing out about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people relate to that, and I'm actually hearing those words and trying to apply it to myself, because I find that, like, I feel like accountability is such a huge asset for as people build their careers, but the beating yourself up, like, move on, right? And I feel like I've gotten better over that, but even I sometimes struggle with, oh man, that really went bad, or I wish I would have done this differently. And just like one of my favorite quotes from Maya Angelou is essentially the easy form of it is know better to do better, right? Okay, you know better now, do better in the future, keep
move
it moving.
on, brush off. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, by the way, like, it's bad for business to dwell and to beat yourself up. Like, it doesn't make you a better decision maker to be stressed.
Right.
You know what I mean?
100%.
So
yeah.
So my advice to younger Jonathan is don't stress out so much. Yeah.
And hopefully people listen to this. If you're that person, it's great that you're accountable. It's great that you try to learn from mistakes, but keep moving forward. And to your point earlier, about the work-life balance question, I always say this too, is like, when you're on your final days, to your point, you can love your job, you can love the company culture, but who's going to be there? Right.
Yeah.
All of this is not going to matter. All
Right.
of it. As much time, you should like what you do. You spend more time than here with your family. So, but when you zoom out, to your point, keep the most important things the most important things.
That's right.
And stop beating yourself up. I love that one. So
Yeah.
Last question here, Jonathan. We get everybody out on this question, which is for anyone listening to this, saying, I want to get to that next level of my career, whatever that looks like for them. What's 3 tips you would provide to that person to take their career to the next level? These 3 tips.
I have 2.
Okay.
And maybe a third will come. It's kind of all connected.
Okay.
I'm thinking back to early days at Facebook. We had these posters on the wall. Oh, I'm going to do all 3 from these posts. I just thought of the third one. So it's less tips and more principles. Is that all right?
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Principles. The first one is move fast and break things. Have you heard of that before?
I like it.
Okay.
I don't know if I've heard it. I don't think I've heard it framed that way, but I like it.
Move fast and break things. And the context of it was that early days, Facebook was willing to have product that shipped, meaning like updates to the app that had bugs in them. Mm-hmm. They were willing to let stuff go out with bugs in it on purpose to keep moving and to keep iterating and to keep growing fast. And it was credited with Facebook's meteoric growth and their ability to lock out other competition like Google and others, which tried to come up with products to compete with Facebook. So in a career context, I'd say, like, don't get paralyzed with your decision making. It's more important to make decisions than it is to always be right.
Right.
Well, that's a sign of a good leader. The second one it sounds so cheesy, but it was one of the posters and it really stuck with me. And it was, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Right? Like, mm-hmm. Remove fear of what your boss is going to say, or what if it doesn't, whatever the thing is. What would you do if you weren't afraid? I still have mine. And if you can't functionally do that thing, at least it's going to give you direction. And it's going to help you to grow. And the last one was, we had it in Latin, but the English translation was find a way or make one. And it was from the famous Roman history Hannibal, the general from Carthage, who was marching elephants through the Alps to attack Rome from the other side, and his military leaders came to him and said they couldn't get through a pass or something, and with the elephants, and his response was, "Find a way or make one." And that for me, what that means is, I think people give up way too quick. Just like thinking about their career, and thinking about how to get from point A to point B. I think people give up way too quick. And they only are thinking about, they think very linearly about how to get somewhere. Being around people like Mark Zuckerberg and Gary Vaynerchuk, I'm gonna tell you, these are people that are thinking like 3D chess. They've been so successful because they are not thinking like you and I. They are thinking like super nonlinear. Though they know that they have to make 5 stops on the perimeter over here to get to B, and we're only thinking from A to B. Right. So I think that's my third one. Find a way or make one.
Love it. Jonathan, thank you. We went overtime a little bit, but I appreciate you, providing your insights, your career story. Honestly, I could probably do this for another hour.
Yeah, this is fun.
But I know that you are a busy individual. But thank you for your partnership, and thank you for taking the time to do the pod.
My honor and privilege. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you. All right,
Thanks,
Jonathan, have a
everyone.
good one.
You too.
Check out more episodes at thenextlevelcareers.com.